Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining for this hearing of the Rules and Reference Committee of Columbus City Council. I am Rob Dorans, member of Columbus City Council, and before we begin tonight for this hearing on proposed short-term regulations or short-term rental regulations, I want to thank everyone for their work in the preparation for today's hearing. Deputy Solicitor General Adam Friedman, who will be joining us here hopefully a little later. Assistant Administrator of Support Services, Kathy Collins. Really appreciate you being here this evening with us. Also want to thank the City Clerk staff, namely Angie Burke, Mark Carter, and the team at CTV for broadcasting this hearing. Thank you, Evan Smith and Andy Stout. I think all of you are probably very excited for things to get out of this virtual world, so your evenings are a little bit more freed up here soon. But I appreciate everything you've done over this past year and a half to make sure that Columbus City Council continues to move. And I believe my council colleague, Councilmember Emmanuel Remy, has joined us as well. Councilmember Remy, thank you for being here. Want to thank the members of the public who've joined tonight for virtually here to learn about these proposed amendments to Columbus City Code Chapter 598 regarding short-term rental regulations and resources. We know this past year during the pandemic has touched nearly every aspect of life here in the city of Columbus, and short-term rental industry is no different. As many of you know, the city's Division of Licensing has not been able to process permits and renewals during the health orders. So we recognize this is an opportune time to make some much needed changes to our code so that we're leveling the playing field when the Division of Licensing reopens to the public on July 22nd. The proposals we're talking about here tonight are not set in stone. We want to give ourselves plenty of time from when we shared the proposals with the public back in the beginning of June and the eventual passage of legislation by City Council in July. We've already made some changes to this proposed legislation based on the feedback that we've heard from stakeholders, which I will mention momentarily. And I expect there will be other changes we make based off the written testimony and public testimony that we've heard tonight, that we'll hear tonight. This hearing is being live streamed on City Council's Facebook page, YouTube page, and being conducted via WebEx. This video will also be posted on the City of Columbus YouTube channel following this event. First, if he's here yet, I want to recognize Deputy Solicitor General of the Columbus City Attorney's Office, Adam Friedman. Is Adam with us yet, Angie?
Not yet. So on his way.
Soon, I think. All right. Well, we'll get to him when he arrives. I would like to also recognize and allow an opportunity for Assistant Administrative Support Services, Kathy Collins, who oversees the permits for short-term rentals. She's here with us tonight, and I wanted to give her an opportunity to speak about this legislation and sort of the process in general. Kathy?
Thank you, Chair Dorans, and thank you, Councilman Remy. As of today, I looked, and we have approximately currently 1,346 primary and secondary permits that we have issued. Understanding that we have not issued any renewals on permits since we closed the office on March 19th of 2020, but we have continued to license new short-term rentals in an effort to keep new businesses starting and being able to prosper. I know that Mr. Friedman's going to talk a lot about the legislation, but I do want to tell you some of our frustrations that we have involving the lack of enforcement that we've been able to do because of the way the code was written. And I know Mr. Friedman will explain a lot of that in some detail later. But our largest complaint categories are, and these are not in order, but big parties, loud music, loud occupants, the guests confronting neighbors when they ask them to turn something down. Some of those have turned rather ugly. Parking issues, trash issues, and structural issues. I know in one case we have been following one that we referred to code for a code violation as well. And I think that's currently in the city attorney's office. Also, we are more recently have gotten complaints on oversaturation in particular areas of town. our biggest violations that we find are either people don't have any license, they make up a license number because especially with one of the platforms, you have to have a license number in order to list on their platform. So they'll make up a license number. They figure out the way we issue them and what our format is and make up one. They use somebody else's license that they've seen on the platform. They use one license on several properties that they own. And one of the biggest problems that we've run into more recently is not notifying the license office when the owner changes, the 24-hour contact changes, the management company changes. So we have old, outdated information, along with some of the owners were in a partnership and maybe the person that licensed it has left that partnership and we don't have any current information. I do want to stress that when we reopen on the 22nd, our short-term rental licenses, in addition to every other license except food trucks, will be ready for renewal and we will be swamped, to say the least. I want people to understand that with this new code, as Mr. Friedman will explain it, applicants will no longer be able to walk in with their application and walk out the same day with a license. We are going to have to hang on to the application while we do the needed research for each license that this code requires us to do. And with that, I'll answer any additional questions you may have.
Thank you, Kathy. And for those that are watching from the short-term rental host community, I'd ask for your grace with Ms. Collins and her team when they do reopen, because they've been closed for quite a while and they handle licensing for not only short-term rental, but every license that the city issues. So as she pointed out, there will be quite the line on July 22nd for folks to get back to the city to get those things updated. So would appreciate folks showing their good Midwestern grace if possible. I also wanted to give the opportunity, before we get too far into the presentation, an opportunity for Councilmember Remy, who chairs the Economic Development Committee for Council, who's well-versed in real estate and economic development, which is certainly impacts this issue, if he had any comments he wanted to make tonight at the start of the hearing. Councilmember?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Councilmember Dorans, for holding the hearing and for championing this cause. This is something that, when we passed this in 2019, I believe, originally. I thought we had some best-in-class legislation, but clearly there have been some bad apples in the city that have caused great community concern. And we want to tighten that up, to try to avoid those types of occurrences. People should be able to put their houses on the market as Airbnbs, but you shouldn't be able to turn houses into party houses, et cetera, that cause great concern, to the community and certainly to members of us that are elected officials. Deputy Director Collins, the question I have for you is, you mentioned something about not being able to walk in and out the same day with the application. However, that would not be the case for a renewal. Am I correct? Or is that, what would, tell me about that a little bit, if you would.
Chair Dorans, Councilman Remy, when we reopen, every renewal is treated basically as a new. They have to go through the exact same process, even if it's a renewal. And that includes the yearly background check, the letter of good standing from the taxation department. We are going to carefully look at their paperwork, because many people were licensed before our two previous updates in the code, and we did not collect the right information at that time. So as of now, like, the owner has to apply under current law and moving forward. So that actually will be the applicant. That was not the case in the first round of the code. So there are some things, including, as you're going to hear later, the ability for us to deny license based upon number of calls for service to the city of Columbus, and we are going to have to diligently check those as well.
Okay, appreciate that. I mean, I think some of this mirrors our hotel registration, which, that's very dear to my heart, working on that up in Northland and really helping to establish that for the city. This was, to take care of these derelict, property owners that disregard, I wanted to say it's common sense stuff that they disregard, that people should be able to enjoy the peaceful tranquility of their environment. And certainly we don't want, to this type of commerce to infringe on that. So I appreciate your work on that. Let me know that. One more question, since you're here, and I know Adam will be taking over here to talk a little bit more about it, but will a lot of this be, is there an online component to this? In other words, I'm just trying to avoid people having to traipse downtown, so tell me about the electronic, the online portion of it, if there is such.
When we were closed for COVID, we did license new ones because there were, I don't want to say they were few and far between, but it was not the caseload that we expect. And we allowed people to scan their paperwork and send it in. One thing COVID did allow us to do, though, is we now have an online portal people can pay through. We have a drop box here at 4252 Groves where our offices are located that people can drop paperwork off after work. And when we reopen, we are going to stay open until 6 o'clock on Wednesday. And if that becomes so popular that we need to extend it to other days, we will, because we do realize people work and we're back to work. Other people are back to work and our hours don't always fit with theirs. So I will add that we are in the process right now of working with the Department of Technology on mapping our system with the hopes of either acquiring a piece of software that the city currently owns or writing an RFP for an online system that will allow people to start their process at home. And maybe the only thing they have to come in for is to get their fingerprints taken care of. And we can probably that's probably the only reason that they'll need to come in. So we are working towards that. We're technologically behind in that department. I hate to say, but we look forward to a better system where our customers can start their process at home, scan their documents in, send them to us. We can put the whole package together, let them know when that's done. They can come in and get their fingerprints at any time during that process. And when we are all done with it, we can issue them their license.
Thank you very much, Chair Dorans. Great chair for the Department of Technology. Whatever you need help with, we need to make sure that we're a 21st century city government serving our people. So we want to make sure that this is as easy and as like we would expect from any other corporation. We want to make sure that technology is our friend and we're utilizing it to serve our people, our residents. Thanks, Chair Doran. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Councilmember Remy. Appreciate you being here tonight and appreciate those questions. Adam Friedman, the Deputy Solicitor General from the City Attorney's Office, has joined us. Adam, I want to give you an opportunity as well to talk a little bit about the legislation, as the City Attorney's Office was one of our main partners in developing the language. So I want to give you an opportunity to speak to that before we get into more of the bulk of the presentation tonight. Adam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Dorans, Councilmember Remy, guests. From a legal perspective, the current code for short-term rentals is not drafted very robustly. It's drafted pretty narrowly when it comes to our enforcement provisions, such that it's difficult to hold bad actors accountable with the current code. And such was the impetus from our office's perspective to take a look at the entire short-term rental code as it exists right now in harmony or disharmony maybe with the hotel motel code. And so what we did, we started at the end with the enforcement provisions, realized that they did not line up with the definitions on the book, and then went through and took a look at the current industry to figure out what were the best way to redefine how short-term rentals exist here in Columbus, how the industry is using those or applying towards the dwellings here in Columbus that we have, whether that's a single family home or a home with a carriage house or a person with an entire building full of units, et cetera, et cetera. There really isn't one size that fits all when it comes to applying this type of legislation to this industry, as this industry is continuously evolving persons continue to find ways to get around any loopholes they can to avoid registering, to avoid paying tax. So from the city attorney's perspective, just going through this and making and fleshing out the areas that would make all stakeholders here happy, and finding ways to make the city's interest, the platform's interest, the host's interests, the hotel motel industry, and the safety of the guests all have to be paramount and primary here and a high priority. So finding that balance is what we tried to do with this legislation. I can't say it's going to be 100% perfect, but it's 100% better than what it is at the moment, than what's on the books. And so this has taken a long time to draft this legislation, and we hope that it just addresses what I just brought up. And we thank you for your leadership on this. We thank you, Councilmember Remy, for your leadership on this. So I'd be happy to answer any questions and go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Friedman. Councilmember Remy, do you have any questions for Adam?
Well, I'm not sure if it's for Deputy Director Collins or Adams, but we, just thinking out loud here, does BCI require prints every time that you run a background check? So in other words, I've got my Airbnb. I'm coming back to renew my license. Do I have to come back down and get my fingerprints once again?
That's a great question, and I think they do require your fingerprints anytime you want to apply, because we don't know what crimes you may or may not have committed, not you particularly, in general, a person may have committed within that past year.
Except they're on file. I mean,
I don't know whether BCI keeps those fingerprints or destroys them. That's not my purview to respond to them.
Kathy, do you know?
Councilman Remy, our code actually says that our prints are only good for 12 months, and that even on a renewal, you have to come in and get new prints taken and a new background check. I don't know what BCI does with those. They may go into their AFIS system, because it's the automated fingerprint system that we use here, and most of our web check places are using. So they probably do go into their system and stay, but it's just a matter of they have to.
I just gotta say, this is a very cumbersome project. This is very cumbersome for somebody that wants to have an Airbnb that, the 98% of the people that do it the right way all of a sudden have to traipse downtown, go park, come in, get their fingerprints taken. I mean, there's got to be a better way.
They can get them taken at any web check location, which most BMVs have that. And we have a web check location right here at 4252 Groves with free parking. You can come in and get it when you're
That
dealing
might be a little bit better than going downtown. You're right.
Yes.
Okay.
We don't like to send people downtown, which is one reason our letter of good standing, we're starting to work with the Department of Taxation, and we're sending in, like when we have a whole bulk that we know, like when it's time for food trucks to get renewed, we send the Department of Taxation the list of all the food trucks we have a couple months in advance, and they are actually sending out the letters of good standing, so people no longer have to come into the taxation department to get their letter of good standing. And if they're not in good standing, they're letting them know that in a different letter, and they can happily make an appointment with them to have them come in and get things straightened up, so they do get a letter of good standing.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Remy. I think at this point of the hearing, we are going to turn to the presentation to get a little bit more into the meat and potatoes of what's actually being proposed in this round of code changes. So Angie, I think I've got screen sharing. Thank you. Very excited for this to be one of the last virtual meetings to make sure I get this right. All right, can everyone see that? All right.
Yes.
Thank you. I needed someone to affirm that this was actually on the screen. So just some background how we got here today, and I'm going to do my best to not read this off for everyone, but just want to go through some of the, again, the meat and potatoes of the legislation and sort of how we got here. So back in 2018 was the first short-term rental legislation that was passed. Anytime there's sort of a new industry that pops up, government is oftentimes maybe a little bit slow to figure out the best way to have sort of the appropriate regulation in place to not only protect citizens but also to make sure that folks that are starting new businesses, folks that are doing things the right way, as Councilmember Remy, are not overly burdened with that regulation. Back in February 19 is when we had additional ordinance that required the BCI background check to make sure that folks that were hosting, because and we have a representative from Airbnb here tonight. They can tell you that a larger percentage than you'd think is actually folks that are hosting people within their home. So it's not just an empty house or apartment. It's actually sort of a shared living situation. That was adopted to make sure that there was a proper safety in place for folks that may be utilizing their short-term rentals. Back in February 19 was when we put into place the regulatory framework for taxes for those we remitted to the city in order for those that are utilizing short-term rentals, much in the same way that those taxes are collected for hotels and motels within the city of Columbus. We've seen rapid rise in the amount of usage of short-term rentals since the last time that we looked at the code. And as I mentioned earlier, since the Division of Licensing has been on pause for the better part of 2 years at this point, it was sort of a great opportunity for us to sit back and think about the regulatory framework here moving forward. So what are the short-term rental resources that are available today? We've wanted to make sure that both hosts and members of the community are aware of what's required of short-term rentals and certainly information about the regulation of them. So columbus.gov/STR houses all the short-term rental information for the city. The Division of Licensing, as we've talked about here today, hosts the permit application process, updated full FAQs, and we will be transitioning here soon to two exciting things. We will have a full-time employee at the Division of Licensing that will be dedicated to short-term rentals, as Ms. Collins talked about earlier today. They work on every single license that's issued by the city of Columbus. And I think, as Councilmember Remy talked about earlier, we don't want to have a cumbersome process in place, and having sort of dedicated staff to this issue, we're very hopeful will help to eliminate additional burdens that are on folks that are using these and doing things the right way as good business folks in Columbus. We've also created an interactive map, which we're going to take a look at here a little bit later in the presentation, for folks in the community to better understand where short-term rentals are in the city and where they aren't. So if they're having an issue with property in their neighborhood, this will better let them know whether or not that property is in fact a short-term rental or not, and provide a 24-hour contact information for the owner or whoever they've dedicated as a staff member to handle. Hopefully so that if there are issues that we'd like to see those solved at the neighborhood level, if possible, before they come to licensing or public safety. Moving on. Some of the things that will be here today is that there will be a new 311 category to register complaints with short-term rentals. Right now, it's a little bit difficult when you enter into the 311 system about how to actually make a valid complaint against a short-term rental or what we believe is a short-term rental with making sure it's flagged appropriately within the system. We're going to talk a little bit more about this here in a little bit. But what the main amendment or what the main changes here today is, it really puts the Division of Licensing in a much better position from a regulatory standpoint for those small number of short-term rentals in which we have seen issues with. Right now, if there are issues with a short-term rental, there's really not the legal authority within the code in order for the folks that are licensing to do an investigation and make sure that there's not issues that are arising with it. we go. So legislation highlights. So there's a number of things, as Mr. Friedman from the City Attorney's Office mentioned earlier. Because this code is also housed within the same area in which regulate hotels and motels within the City of Columbus, there are some changes that we need to make in order to make sure that we're actually regulating short-term rentals, like short-term rentals and not hotels. So here's a couple of definitional things that we're changing in order to do that, including making sure that individual hotel rooms as being considered short-term rentals. We're also updating the definition of hosting platform and short-term rental host and short-term rentals themselves to better actually appropriate what actually exists in actual common usage here in 2021. The code 598.02 broadened the scope of who's going to be required to obtain a permit, either through a hotel or motel or short-term rentals. The application and renewal, as we've already talked about here today, has updated some technology requirements and those who are submitting to a BCI background check. Clarifies that non-owners, so permanent residents, must show at least that explicitly allows for short-term rentals on their property and covers that transfer of ownership in situations. This is to prevent someone who's renting a house, renting an apartment, from listing that house or apartment as a short-term rental without the knowledge of the landlord or the owner of the property. We've seen this come up a number of times, and this will help put folks in a better position to prevent that from happening. Certainly, a landlord or owner could still authorize that within a lease, but you'd want that interaction to happen between those two parties rather than have the city get involved. There's additional basis for denial of the application if it's incomplete. We've also clarified a number of things as what's going to be a short-term rental compared to a rooming house, which again is pretty in the weeds as far as how the code treats it. But again, as we've talked about here tonight, a number of different ways in which new types of technology, new types of lodging are, in the same type of regulatory code as something as old as a rooming house, which does not actually happen as much as they used to. The short-term rental hosts and platforms, only owners and permanent occupants can be hosts. We are also eliminating the requirement that is currently in the code that requires hosts to have proof of general liability insurance. After discussions with folks in the host community, this seemed to be not something that necessarily the city need to worry about. This is more for the protection of the hosts themselves. And if they elect to not get that insurance, that's a risk that they're taking. But this eliminates one additional thing that they need to submit to the city. Again, thinking about sort of streamlining what is required and what is not required of hosts. Here is a 0.05, grounds for denial, revocation, or suspension. This is really one of the most important aspects of this legislation. It provides expanded bases for the required actions, as well as discretionary authority for the Department of Public Safety and Licensing to deny, revoke, or suspend or investigate any issues with someone holding a short-term rental permit. We've looked at this as a sort of 3 strikes, and we're going to take a look at it. So 3 call for service can authorize a discretionary investigation. It's not required, but it gives the discretion to licensing and public safety to look into the applicant, the host, or the dwelling. Under this change, the city can now revoke a permit for, quote, diminishing quality of life in a neighborhood, as well as for issues of public nuisance. Previous definitions were very narrow as far as when that could occur. This will allow the licensing to have a little more broad power here and allow to sort of be more specific or allowed to apply to more situations. One of the things that's really key on that point is that does not mean that a permit is going to be automatically revoked or suspended from an operator. This just sets into place a process that is very similar to every other license that exists in the city of Columbus. Sets forth in a appeals process. So folks who hold the license are having issues. they believe that, whatever the issue was isolated to an individual guest or some very, very limited issue. And then they have the same rights as anyone else does who has a license revoked from the city of Columbus through this very specific appeals and hearing process. And that will allow, again, due process to folks that are going through this, but also puts the city in a position where we can be far more proactive when an issue occurs. And I want to emphasize these instances are rare, but when they happen, the city needs to be in a position to be able to actually be proactive about that enforcement moving forward. So some of the updates since we've originally sent this proposal out to stakeholders and members of the public. We've made several different changes. We've clarified that 3 or more calls for service gives the director the discretion to deny, revoke, suspend an application or permit, as we just talked about. We clarified that 3 calls that are not unfounded will not result in automatic revocation of the permit. This is to make sure that if someone's just calling repeatedly over and over again, that would not simply put an operator in a position where they would just automatically have their permits rescinded. We've also put into place that if a host or an owner calls the city public safety about an issue that's happened at that short-term rental, then that is not going to count towards that 3 calls. This is because we want folks who are hosting to feel like they can call for help when they have a guest that is not actually following their house rules. We don't want to put a disincentive into place in order for folks to not feel like they can reach out to the city in order to get help if necessary. We've also made a change that provides a short-term rental permit will take effect upon the expiration of the previous permit to make sure that folks aren't penalized for coming in to do this early. So back when divisional licensing is back operating as normal, folks don't have to wait until the last minute in order to go ahead and file this, to make this a little more streamlined for folks. And hopefully it makes sure that that line of people next year when they're coming back to renew things is a little bit shorter for the division of licensing, and not everyone's trying to get the permit at the same time. The other thing that was discussed, an earlier version of this legislation had notice of occupancy placards that were required to be displayed on the exterior of the property, alerting when folks were utilizing the property as a short-term rental. That is no longer going to be required within the legislation that's going to go before council. As I mentioned earlier, there's also going to be an online map that's going to be associated moving forward. So the Department of Technology did some great work on an online interactive map that will show where valid short-term rental permits are located throughout the city. This map is very similar to many maps that exist in cities across the country. Again, I'm going to show you a little bit of a mock-up on that map here in a little bit. The information is going to be provided. The information that's going to be included will be that information that's provided by the individuals that are submitting for an application. This was a tool created for hosts, guests, neighborhood groups, and residents to work together to try and make sure that short-term rentals continue to be a value added to neighborhoods and not to detract. The map's going to be available at that website, columbus.gov/STR. Upon the passage of this legislation. And here you are. Here's the online map. Those dots there are short-term rentals within the city of Columbus. You can see how they're distributed around the city right now. And when you hover over a dot, this is what's going to come up. You'll have some basic information about the short-term rental itself. And here's what the real key is, the 24/7 contact information. So this is really where we really want to avoid some of the negative issues that have happened with some short-term rentals in which folks in the community have someone that they can contact. So, we still want to encourage folks to, file a complaint with 311 or Division of Licensing or Public Safety if necessary. But if it's, hey, every week the trash doesn't get put out to the right spot or what have you, we're really hoping that this can be a neighbor-to-neighbor sort of interaction and prevent some of those long festering issues that we've seen with some short-term rentals in the city. The map will also have the ability to look at short-term rentals as far as the different area commissions that we have in the city of Columbus. And here's our timeline moving forward. So we shared the original proposal on June 7th with stakeholders and other folks. Tonight we're here holding our public hearing. This legislation will be on the council's agenda on July 21st, drafted as emergency so that it takes effect immediately, which means that when Ms. Collins opens up the Division of Licensing, we don't have to wait 30 days for the legislation to take effect, that folks that are applying for a renewal or a new permit, since everyone will essentially be applying for a new permit at that point, since the rules will be a little bit different, that that will all be happening and everyone will be on the same page as we move forward. Want to thank everyone for being here tonight for the presentation. We have a number of speakers that want to come next, but for members of the public that may not have my contact information, I wanted to put this up for just a moment. Feel free to shoot me an email if you have questions, comments on what we've talked about here tonight. My legislative aide, Kevin McCain's information is listed there as well. You can get both of our contact information as well from the City Council website. So with that, I'm going to attempt to stop sharing my screen. Looks like I pulled that off finally in this virtual world. So only took a year and a half for me to get good at this. But appreciate everyone's time and attention with that presentation. I hope that was informative. But I want to turn next to, we've invited a number of speakers here tonight that all have different perspectives on short-term rentals, this legislation, its importance. And I also apologize if folks can hear my 6-month-old in the background enjoying his dinner for the night. He's very excited about solids these days. So first, I'd like to go to our invited speaker and share their feedback on this legislation. Mr. Joe Savarese from representing the Ohio Hotel and Lodging Association. Joe, are you with us?
Yes, thank you, Councilman. I am Joe Savarese. I'm the president and CEO of the Ohio Hotel and Lodging Association and its Greater Columbus Lodging Council. And while I'm out of state this afternoon for my first national conference since 2019, it's 106 degrees in Boston, by the way. So they've got nothing on us in terms of the weather. It was I appreciate that there's at least one more virtual hearing because I did want to appear today to offer our organization and our industry's support for the changes proposed to Chapter 598 that will help the community as a whole address issues in all types of transient accommodation rentals when those issues happen, because Chapter 598, as you rightly pointed out, does include the hotel licensure provisions as well. And we always approach these together as they interrelate to one another within the chapter. The revisions will offer protections for a responsible host while allowing the city to address issues in a small segment of the short-term rental market. The city of Columbus has long recognized the synergy between our traditional hotels and our strong and growing short-term rental market. Many of the members of our organization in the unique lodging sector utilize short-term rental platforms. So we represent members that use these platforms and benefit from them greatly. And we want to continue to provide opportunities for those hosts and entrepreneurs and to serve visitors and help grow our travel economy. And we know that the city shares those goals as well. So I really wanted to just, express our appreciation for the willingness of you and of those involved in the crafting of this legislation to accept input and questions and to address concerns, before they came issues, before the legislation was finalized. Once again, I think that collaborative approach and that Columbus way wins out and produces better results. Those conversations have been productive and they help us avoid pitfalls. And I will say, most specifically, we wanted to avoid providing a mechanism that could be abused by individuals who want to target either hotels or short-term rental hosts with unwarranted and malicious complaints. And that's always been a concern of ours going back to our first discussions in 2018. And we appreciate that you do understand the issue that exists there. We further appreciate the commitment of council and the city attorney's office to ensure that changes to the permitting process avoid unnecessary redundancies and provide flexibility and efficiency to all lodging business applicants. Surely, to Councilman Remy's point, there are always things that we can continue to talk about and improve. And I hope we can continue to do that just in terms of some of the logistics, but this really helps us take some important steps along those lines as well. I'd be remiss if I didn't point out, just due to the timing of today's meeting and getting the new draft language today, I do hope the council will allow our organization, but all of our partners and all the interested parties to just complete one final review and submit our written comments. But I had a chance to glance through it before jumping on this evening, and I think we definitely are on track, and we thank you for that willingness to address the clarifications and comments that we raised. That was a very helpful process. But our industry and the community and neighbors should be confident that the intent of this timely update, because it is timely because of the licensing process opening back up again soon, that it will allow the city to balance the desire to keep the destination vibrant, but to support jobs and economic opportunity and the unique fabric of the neighborhoods. That's what we've been striving for all along. Going back to our early discussions on that, we think that council, the city attorney's office, the mayor, and everybody involved have always been good partners in that, and we thank you for those efforts. So I have nothing to object to in the draft that we went through and provided comments on. I feel confident that those things are being addressed, and I'll be sure to submit a final written comment to you for the record after we go through the draft we received today. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate you being here tonight, and leave the weather with you there. We're already a little bit too warm here in Columbus, but appreciate that. And as I said at the outset, nothing is set in stone here tonight. So certainly you, members of the public or others, we're very interested in hearing additional comments on the current draft as we're moving towards July 12th. So appreciate you being here and continue to be a good partner on this legislation. Next, I'd like to introduce Rachel DeLidi-Ore. I believe her title is Policy Associate with Airbnb. And Rachel, I apologize if I got your last name wrong, so please feel free to correct me. But I appreciate you being here tonight with us.
Absolutely. That was very close, closer than most people get. So I appreciate that. Well, thank you so much for hosting me this evening. I really appreciate the chance to speak with all of you. And, Chair Dorans, thank you so much for inviting me. And Councilman Remy, thank you for being here as well. As Chair Dorans almost said, I am Rachel DeLidi-Ore. I am with Airbnb's public policy team, and I cover the Midwest, and I work with our partners in government as well as a number of other stakeholders. And Airbnb has a long-standing partnership with the city of Columbus, along with cities, towns, and countries around the world. It's very important to us to add value to the communities through supporting the democratization of tourism and allowing a broad swath of residents to benefit from the visitor economy. This is particularly important now, I think, as my colleague Joe just shared, when so many people are suffering the economic toll of a global pandemic, as people work to make ends meet. It's really vital that they have access to all possible income streams. And we've seen that home sharing has allowed millions of hosts to generate essential income, which has helped pay for everything from school tuition, fix a leaky roof, supplement retirement income. And Columbus is unique, and Chair Dorans touched on this earlier. It's unique in that nearly a quarter of all Airbnb listings in the city are private rooms in people's homes. These aren't major property management companies. These are families and individuals opening their homes to guests and supporting themselves and bringing economic activity into their communities. We also understand that regulating home sharing is important, and there's no one size fits all. And that's why we really appreciate the thoughtful approach from the city of Columbus in updating the short-term rental rules. For starters, we think it's really great that the city is cracking down on those bad actors, the sort of 3 strikes you're out. The vast majority of hosts are responsible and committed to fostering positive activity in their communities. So for those rare bad actors, it's really important that the city be empowered to revoke their registration and prevent them from disrupting the community. As a company, we're really committed to supporting communities address those bad actors, and we've done so through implementing a number of policies and programs over the years, in particular during the pandemic, to block parties and disruptive events from occurring in Airbnb listings. A year ago, Airbnb announced an initiative that restricts guests under the age of 25 without a history of positive reviews from booking entire home listings in their local area under certain circumstances. And the objective of this new system was to try to reduce the rate of unauthorized parties. So here we are 1 year later, and I can share that we just announced that in the past year, this technology has blocked or redirected potentially risky reservation attempts in Columbus from over 3,000 people. During the pandemic, Airbnb also took a number of steps to ensure community safety, including implementing a global party ban. So typically people use Airbnbs for all kinds of safe, authorized gatherings, baby showers, family reunions. Understanding that large gatherings were a clear threat to public health, Airbnb banned all parties and announced a cap of 16 guests in all listings, no matter the size of the home. And in November of 2020, Airbnb suspended or removed 40 listings in Columbus for violation of our house party policies. Further, the company announced that it may take legal action against those who violate these policies. In fact, the company has done so on several occasions to date. We take these policies very seriously and expect our users to as well. Our community standards extend well beyond the emergency needs of the pandemic. All Airbnb guests and hosts must commit to complying with local regulations, and we do conduct background checks on all US-based users. And for those rare occasions that there is a problem, we've made it easy to get in touch with the right person at Airbnb in a timely manner. So for general concerns, we have the neighborhood support line, which is a 24/7 hotline that anyone can access. We also have the law enforcement portal, where law enforcement officials can get in touch with a specialist at Airbnb and work together to address the problem. The Columbus Police Department has used this portal, worked successfully with our team. We're really proud to support during those challenging moments. And speaking a little bit more broadly, as we turn the corner on this global pandemic, we know that housing security is a major concern for many Americans. So recently we announced a new program to work with cities to restrict landlords who evict a tenant for non-payment of rent following the end of an eviction moratorium from listing that home as a short-term rental on the Airbnb platform for a period of at least 6 months. With over 11 million Americans behind on their rent, we are committed to being part of the solution and to supporting not just Airbnb users, but entire communities. So as you can tell, safety is very important to us. It is the priority at Airbnb, as we know it is for the people of Columbus. So to that end, we are concerned about the proposed map of short-term rentals that will be made public. That is part of this ordinance. So we are really appreciative of the diligent work and partnership of Chair Dorans to find ways of improving the safety of Columbus. But we would urge you and fellow council members to work with us, other short-term rental platforms, and the host community to continue to strengthen those safety measures. However, a map publishing the location of people's homes in the city, we don't believe is the way to do so. We have seen these maps in other cities, but we've also seen these maps lead to public demonstrations outside of residents' homes, as well as other forms of harassment. And that's not the way Columbus residents deserve to be treated. So we understand that the map is meant to provide transparency and enforcement capabilities to the city, but we're really confident that can happen without endangering residents. I think as we've touched on earlier in this meeting, short-term rentals provide vital economic activity to Columbus, not just to hosts, but to the many vendors who service the homes, as well as restaurants, markets, other local attractions that benefit from visitors. Our research shows that people who stay in short-term rentals spend 42% more in local communities than those who stay in traditional accommodations. It's really important that the people of Columbus have access to this economic opportunity, and hope that the council is really thoughtful about making the process to become a host thorough, but not unnecessarily burdensome. I think we can all agree that the travel boom anticipated for this summer is exciting. And it's important that the people of Columbus are empowered to benefit from it as much as possible and do it only they can, serve as excellent ambassadors for the city. So I'm really grateful for the thoughtful consideration of these new regulations, for the opportunity to give feedback. I certainly welcome any questions you have, and we're really looking forward to continuing our partnership. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate you being here tonight. And I know we've got a couple of weeks before this is on for council's consideration. So I know we'll be working with you in that time period as well. So appreciate you being here. Lastly, as far as our invited speakers here this evening, we have Mr. Jeff Smith, who's representing the Columbus Host Alliance, which is a informal group of hosts of short-term rental operators here in the city of Columbus. Jeff, you with us?
Yes.
Floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Dorans and Councilmember Reed, for your diligence and a collaborative approach to this issue and efforts to tighten up the code as well as streamline the application process. As Councilmember Dorans mentioned, the Columbus Host Alliance is an informal group of about 500 short-term rental hosts that are committed to providing a safe and positive experience for guests, as well as being good neighbors to their community. We are supportive of rules that are fair and quantifiable that help protect guests, hosts, and neighbors. And it appears that most of this revised legislation is designed to do just that. While we have some concerns over specific language shared, and we want to avoid anyone abusing the reporting system, we are supportive of fair enforcement of rules and want the city to have the tools to do that. I would like to remind everyone that this legislation is meant to address issues with an exceedingly small percentage of guests and hosts. The vast majority of hosts have very few issues with guests, and most all hosts work extremely hard to avoid guests whose sole purpose is to have a party that potentially damages their property and causes issues for their neighborhood. When issues arise, most hosts are very quick to act and do all they can to remove that guest and take care of the situation. A good percentage of hosts, as previously mentioned, are renting out an extra room in their home. Many more are renting out a carriage house or the other half of a double. And many live in the same neighborhood as their short-term rental. And they're your friends and neighbors. They strive to provide an incredibly positive experience for their guests that in no way detracts from the neighborhood. Short-term rental guests enjoy staying in the neighborhood, and they support neighborhood businesses. Guests can come for a variety of reasons that don't involve a party. They may be visiting family living in the neighborhood, visiting a child at one of the many universities, a weekend getaway to celebrate a special occasion, and even wanting to be nearby a loved one who may be in a local hospital. There's also, of course, conventions, concerts, and sporting events that help support the local economy. And some just need a temporary place to stay while repairs or renovations take place in their own home and they want to stay in their own neighborhood. For many of these guests, the hotel experience isn't best for them. They enjoy the convenience of being in a more home-like setting. So while we are supportive of fair rules and enforcement, we do take exception to the map issue. This creates privacy and security issues that potentially expose a property and guest to safety issues. It creates the ability for criminals to cross-reference a map of short-term rental hosting sites to determine when a property is vacant. It potentially subjects property owners to harassment by neighbors, even if there are no issues with the nearby short-term rental. I'm not aware of other city permits that have a public-facing map with detailed personal information. I hope we can move forward with this legislation without the public map component and some fine-tuning of the specific language so that we have a fair piece of legislation that works for hosts, guests, and neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, and I appreciate you and certainly the other folks from the Host Alliance meeting with us to talk about the legislation. And I know those conversations will not stop anytime soon. So appreciate you being here tonight and sharing your testimony with council and the public. We have also received quite a bit amount of written testimony from members of the public that will be entered in the clerk's record for this hearing and will be shared with the other council offices. We also have 6 members of the public who signed up to speak here this evening. I'll remind our speakers that they have each 3 minutes to deliver their remarks. I always like to say we're Midwestern polite, so don't make us abuse the 3 minutes here too much. We will first get started with Area Commissioner Roy Lowenstein. Commissioner Lowenstein, you with us?
I am. I'm not sure how to turn on the video though. Can someone give me an instruction? I don't see any place to put that on.
Angie, is he able to turn on the public speaker is able to turn on their video, or is it just audio?
It's audio for attendees.
Okay. All right. Well, that's disappointing, but I'll get going. So
Councilmember Dorans, would you like video or?
If Commissioner Lowenstein would prefer to be on video, if we can make that happen quickly, then that'd be fine.
Okay, one moment. Try your video now, Commissioner.
there we go. Thank you very much. I just sort of level playing field, you know. So I would just like to say that I have nothing against short-term rentals. My family uses them when we go out of town. I mean, it's not like I hate the industry or anything like that. But I live on the 1700 block of Oak Street, and we've really had a serious problem on this street with a particular Airbnb. And I don't even know if it's still operating. They're renovating it now because it got trashed so badly. But the point I'd like to make is this. I'm not just an angry neighbor. I've been working in affordable housing development for more than 40 years. So I have dealt with all the systems of regulation that we have out there dealing with housing, how group homes to apartments to houses, what have you. So I come from that background. I do appreciate the changes that have been made or being proposed in the legislation to give some teeth to weeding out bad actors. I think we all sort of recognize that needed to happen. So that's all good. But the problem that I think that there is with the legislation is that it doesn't go far enough. I think that it's still relying on two mechanisms almost entirely to deal with issues that come up. First is citizen complaints, and the second one are simply market forces, hoping that hosts respond to market. The problem is that both of those are inadequate mechanisms for addressing problems. You know, living here in the central city, we deal all the time with 311 complaints, and it's like a very, very mixed bag on how well all of those things are handled. And, you know, we made endless complaints through 311 and otherwise about this Airbnb, and honestly, nothing really happened. As a result of that, I sent my email exchanges with a wide range of city departments back in 2019 when this really all came to a head, and I got absolutely nowhere. Basically, what I was told was that the city licensing regulations sort of dictated the limits of what any city department could do to try to enforce common sense rules and regulations. And so no one could do anything. You know, I reached out to everyone from council offices to the city attorney's office to Heather Truesdale's office to Mr. Prezzuti in zoning, and there was really no relief to be had. So across the street from me was a double, 3-bedroom aside double with an attic. And it was advertised extensively as 16 occupants per side. So we're talking about an ordinary half double having up to 16 people at a time. And nothing in the proposed legislation now is going to limit occupancy. So I think the biggest shortcoming of this is that there is no inspection by the city before a license is issued to determine whether occupancy is. Well, I'm going to continue shortly. I think that if we limit occupancy to 2 people per bedroom, it would go very far to eliminate some of the problems we've had, as well as parking. We have semis that people park on the street. This very same Airbnb had 2 off-street parking spaces, which were not even really able to be used because the condition was so rough back there. Everyone parks on the street. That's really a problem. And I think there's a safety issue for people who stay in the Airbnbs. I think to put up to 16 people in a single apartment with one open stair up to the third floor, you're just asking for a catastrophe. And so I think what we need to do is increase the fee and actually create an inspection prior to getting your license so you can see what an appropriate occupancy would be. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here, Commissioner Lowenstein. I appreciate your testimony. And I'll just say on one of the topics, and certainly happy to correspond with you offline here, we have spoke with the city attorney's office about how occupancy would work with regulating short-term rentals. We are limited by the fire code, and it gets very, very tricky in how we would implement something on that topic. Not to say it can't happen, but it certainly not something that we were ready to bring in this iteration of the legislation. But appreciate you being here tonight, and certainly happy to correspond with you by email. Next, we have Connie Grappo. Ms. Grappo, are you here with us?
I am. Can you
You
hear
have 3 minutes. Floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much for listening. I'm an Airbnb host. I've been a host for 3 years. I live in Clintonville and have a carriage house on my property, and it's a small 1-bedroom Airbnb, which we have limitations in the rule book where not more than 2 people can occupy it at a time. We've never had any complaints. It's very quiet. I see that the placard has been dropped. The placard rule has been dropped. I hope that stays off the table. I think that would be a lot of exposure for us that would potentially be uncomfortable in the neighborhood, and also just very cumbersome to keep that always current. The other thing that concerns me is this map. The map would post to strangers our address, our phone number, and whether or not, and people could then potentially see whether someone was in there or not in there. It just feels like a real invasion of our privacy. Even though, I mean, if someone needs to know who is operating a particular Airbnb, if they're a member of Airbnb, then they've been vetted, and there's some registration. So that would be my request, is just to eliminate the map. But I appreciate you listening, and I appreciate learning a lot about this whole process tonight. So whatever decisions you come to, I'm sure will be good for the city and good for Airbnb. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. And one thing I did want to mention, and again, as I said earlier, nothing here tonight is certainly set in stone. But everything that will be on the map is already a public record, as that information has been submitted to the city for the applications themselves. So, we're looking at, not posting everything that's part of the permit application, certainly, but as currently constructed, it's the attempted is to slim it down to make sure that, again, folks know where these are operating within the city, and have that opportunity to hopefully have a good interaction with neighbors if there are concerns that come up. But certainly interested in that continued dialogue with folks. Next, we have Commissioner Melissa Tompkins from the Milo Grogan area. Commissioner Tompkins, are you with us? Angie, do we have Commissioner Tompkins?
Yes, she has been unmuted. Melissa?
Hello.
Commissioner, welcome.
Hi. Thank you, Chair Dorans and Councilman Remy for having this. I have been waiting for something like this to be proposed for the past couple of years. So I have several thoughts based off our experiences here in our community. From my perspective, I don't think that it's so much that neighborhoods such as ours, and I know in Wyland Park, are having so much of a high good experience from short-term rentals, as we just really didn't have much information as to where to turn for help. I know that we as community leaders, with the commission, with our civic, we put a lot of time and effort into our community and our neighborhood cleanups and efforts in trying to make the community safe. I am in support of this proposal because this gives us some rights, or it acknowledges our rights and helps to protect how we're affected by visitors at short-term rentals. I just want to briefly share from the past probably year. Our experience with short-term rentals has been a lot of criminal activity, excessive trash. We've been exposed to indecent exposure, prostitution, drugs, you name it. Things that we, again, as residents, work really hard not to have in our community. By us being able to see this on a map and seeing where these are located in our community, this will help us to keep our families safe. Unlike a hotel where you would go in and there would be a front desk and security and cameras, the unhosted short-term rentals has no security, not for the guests or for the community. And so oftentimes we are experiencing people doing things that I'm sure they would never do in places where they live at. And so I'm happy for this proposal. Something else that I want to bring to attention is that as our neighborhood is growing, we have new builds out here, and we have neighbors who just spent $300,000 to move into a neighborhood, only to see the Airbnb across the street raided within weeks by CPD because of level of drug activity that was over there. So I am in support of this, and everyone I've spoken with out here in Milo Brogan is in support of this proposal, the way in which it is written. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Tompkins, and as always, appreciate everything that you and your family do for the Milo Brogan neighborhood. It's good to hear from you tonight. So thanks for being here. Next, we have Mr. Scott Haskett. Mr. Haskett, are you with us?
Hey there. Can you hear me?
I can. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate everyone's efforts in updating our code for relevancy and effectiveness. As a host of nearly 4 years, I do very much worry about the public map being available, as potential bad actors will easily see rental listings along with that property's open calendar dates and the photos of the contents of the home, leading to easy targets of theft, which ironically could lead to a potential police call towards the 3-call limit. Secondly, are the 3 calls on a per year basis, or for what time period? It doesn't appear to be specified in the code that was provided, and it might be worth specifying. My last concern regards property tax abatements. So it's my belief that the city's 1994 community reinvestment areas from 25 years ago for property tax abatements did not imagine nor account for short-term rentals. The core principle of our housing abatement policy is to foster private sector investment to build mixed income neighborhoods. The argument for these tax abatements is that they encourage investment in lower socioeconomic neighborhoods. This has led to an unintended consequence of as developers of all sizes are receiving property tax abatements with the expectation that these properties would be available for longer term residents. But this is not always happening, as many developers are listing these properties with tax abatements on short-term rental platforms. As I don't believe this was the original intention, I ask that the City Council make updates so that future property tax abatements include language restricting short-term rental use, so that long-term rentals for inhabitants are provided as intended within the core mission of the program design. Thank you.
Thank you for being here tonight, sir. And the actual update to the council incentive policy for CRAs is actually soon to be underway. And I think that's an excellent point to consider. And those community reinvestment areas are somewhat limited by the Ohio Revised Code about how they can be amended. But I certainly think that that is a very worthy discussion, as obviously, as you point out, the point there is to encourage long-term development of housing for folks, especially at a time in which Columbus is in need of more of that. So I certainly appreciate your comments, and that certainly we'll bring that up with the folks that are involved in that process. So appreciate you being here tonight and providing your testimony. Next before us, we have Miss Audra Wheeler. Ms. Wheeler, are you on the line? Angie, do we have Miss Wheeler?
Councilmember, we're checking. She called in just using the call-in number, so we don't have her name. So we are checking the different call-in users. In just one moment.
Yep, not a problem at all.
Miss Wheeler? Ms. Wheeler? Audra Wheeler? Audra Wheeler? Ms. Wheeler?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
We can. The floor is yours, ma'am.
Perfect. So I have loved listening to the conversation. I've been on the line for like an hour and a half, and unfortunately, I haven't been able to see any of the presentation just due to appointments. But I have been an Airbnb host for 10 years. I have loved hosting just due to the pure experience of meeting different people from different backgrounds, different cultures, different experiences. I would say that, 95% of my hosting is positive, and there's 5% that I will write a book on one day because it's just so interesting and different and weird. But what I will say is I do think that a lot of this legislation change is not directed at your hosts who are doing what they're supposed to do. They're being very hands-on. They are protecting their properties and their neighborhoods and their communities. And they became hosts because they love hosting in these communities. I know that all of my neighbors have my number. So if they want my information, if there's an issue, they can contact me directly and we can have a conversation. But one of my biggest things that was somewhat of a concern is my job, my full-time career is a real estate agent. And I am concerned about the map and just the location of properties. I am a long-term tenant owner. I'm a short-term rental owner. I work with investors. I work with people who are just trying to sell their homes. And I do know that I have experienced, I feel like it's been an uptick of people who are, breaking into properties and just kind of that criminal intent of like taking things out of properties and getting into properties that aren't occupied. And I am a little bit concerned about posting the locations of specific Airbnbs. Airbnb keeps it very general as far as the area where Airbnbs are located. If we're posting specific locations, there are people out there. And I actually experienced one with one of our real estate clients this past weekend. People are looking for vacant homes. They're looking to get in and get goods. They're looking to get in and squat. They're looking for a place to stay. And I am concerned about the security and the safety, not only for the Airbnb owner, but also for neighbors. When you have someone who can pull up a location on the city's website and then pull up Airbnb and see, okay, this place is not booked for 2 weeks. I know that I have exterior security cameras and an alarm system at my properties, and I am very hands-on, so I look at these things almost hourly. But unfortunately, I know that all hosts are not able to do so. And I just am concerned about the safety and security that posting this information. I do know that this is public information, but I do think that there should be some formal process as far as requesting this information. Now, I am a huge advocate. I want people, if there's an issue at my property, I promise you, I will be the first person to be contacting or reaching out to that person or Airbnb if there is an issue, but I will, and I am 100% okay with someone letting me know if there is an issue, because I want to rectify that, and I don't want my neighbors or my community to have to deal with that. But again, I worry that putting out a map out there with specific information for properties makes it very easy to pull up the Airbnb app and see what is vacant. And that is a concern. I know it's a concern as a real estate agent. We are constantly dealing with squatters and people breaking into properties. And I am confident that this would be an issue if that information is out there as well.
Well, thank you, Ms. Wheeler, for being here tonight and for your testimony. And I have to say thank you for being very proactive with your neighbors and making sure that they're aware of the short-term rental that you operate, and that's it sounds like you are one of those like 98% of folks that are doing things absolutely the right way. So appreciate you being here tonight and sharing your testimony and what you're doing in your neighborhood to invite folks into Columbus. Lastly, we have before us this evening is Amy Ivanov. Ms. Ivanov, are you with us?
I am. I'm going to go quickly because we're all busy here. I'm a retired educator. I've been living in this home for 47 years. I bought it. I pay taxes. At the beginning of each semester, I would ask my students how many of them knew their next door neighbors. Show of hands. I would ask them 2 doors over, show of hands. The block, show of hands. Little did I know that it's gotten worse and what was to come. I live adjacent to 422, 424 East Stewart Avenue. I also was volunteering at Siebert Elementary around the corner. My backyard is adjacent to the Stewart Avenue parking, off-street parking. Because short-term renters are not part of the fabric of our community, they have no vested interest in supporting it, nor do the owners who may live in affluent neighborhoods to the north of us or other cities, states, or even other countries. And we've got one around the corner by Siebert who lives in Chicago. I mentioned that one because while I was volunteering at the school, on my way home one day, I picked up used drug needles directly across the street from the elementary school. 422 has brought a host of problems to us. We've had a huge weekend party during COVID that spilled over to the neighbor's house next door to them. 422, 424 is a double. 426 was invaded at 12 o'clock at night because the party was too loud. So they moved to the front porch. That was at midnight. At 12:30, I, around the corner, who sleeps in the front of the house on the second floor, went to 422 and said, please turn the sound down. The fellows who were staying in 424 said, it's not us, lady, it's not us. I said, I know that. Well, there were upwards of 100 kids in that place. The trash has been ridiculous. In fact, they earned 4 pink slips in the past month, 2 on their recycle bins, 2 on the trash bins. The trash pickup will not touch it because it's such a mess. The stench pervades my backyard. As I said, I'm a long-term resident. My little backyard is very comfortable, except when the wind shifts and I can't use it because of the stench over there. Additionally, we have enjoyed prostitution, drug sales. The prostitution was actually, and drug sales were actually happening when the woman had her minor child with her. We've had drug sales that were so quickly recognized by the police that the fellows, not just men, and women were only there for 4 hours before the police came out and shut them down. One of my neighbors actually had been living here for 6 years, actually sold her house and moved out of the neighborhood because she just didn't want to deal with it anymore. This is what's going on. We have been calling the police. I'm not the only one, folks. I was out of town when the last one, and there have been so many neighbors across the street. This is crazy. They don't care about us. You're allowing carpetbaggers to come in and make profit on the backs of us. It's not fair. It's not fair. We've got nice homes here. We've got a nice community here. This is not good. There's a difference between a bed and breakfast when the host is on site and the owner, the Airbnb, when the owner is living across town. They don't care about us. They just want their money.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Ivanov. I appreciate you being here tonight. That concludes the public testimony portion of tonight's hearing. I want to thank everyone who joined us for being part of this hearing this evening. I want to thank again Adam Friedman from the City Attorney's Office, Kathy Collins of the Division of Licensing, my legislative aide, Kevin McCain, who's been integral in this legislation and setting up this hearing tonight, my office's intern, Ryan Redding, the council staff, and CTV who worked to make tonight's hearing happen. I think this is our, actually, I think we have one more public hearing virtually before we're back in council chambers next week. I appreciated all the public speakers here tonight and certainly our presenters very much. I think everyone has a different perspective on the issues that we're talking about here tonight. And I certainly learned a little bit of how folks have had short-term rentals impact their lives for the better, and certainly some folks who have had short-term rentals impact for the lives for the worse. So I think this legislation is certainly a balance towards better regulation here in the city of Columbus to crack down on some of the issues that we've seen, while at the same time making sure that folks that do things the right way continue to be able to operate their businesses appropriately. Those who are interested in learning more about the legislation would like to make additional comments, feel free to email me at radorans@columbus.gov. We're going to take the feedback we heard tonight and certainly anything that we receive here moving forward and make any changes to the legislation before it will appear on council's agenda at the next council meeting, which will be Monday, July 12th at 5 p.m. in council chambers at City Hall. If that passes by emergency, it will go into effect by July 22nd when the Division of Licensing reopens. Again, thank you to everyone, including the members of the public that joined us here this evening. With that, this hearing of the Rules and Reference Committee of the Columbus City Council is adjourned. Have a good evening, everybody.